Rough winter for two folks getting on. I heard you lost your barn roof. The stock alone, in this condition, I'd say 12 head, sound. The rest won't.
15 carrying calves come spring. The brand inspector in Hamilton can ride out and count them, same as I did. Anything under that, you'd best ride on before the light goes. "19 head, sound, not 12.
The old woman counted the coins without moving her lips, the way she had learned to count them in front of company, so no one would know how few there were. 3 silver pieces and a dime worn smooth. She set 2 back in the tin and closed the lid before her husband could see her do it. Outside, the first true snow of the year came down thick as goose feathers, and the light was already going gray at 4 in the afternoon. Beyond the window stood 2 graves on the low rise past the barn, their markers frosted white. And on the road that ran up from the valley, a man was walking. No horse, no wagon, just a shape coming out of the storm on foot, canvas roll over one shoulder, bent into the wind like a man who had done this 100 times before and expected to die doing it. Edna Hale watched him come and felt something turn over in her chest, cold and certain. Not like this, she thought. Please, not another one taken by this land. Not like this. They had been on that ground in the Bitterroot country of Montana for 38 years, she and Walter, since before it was much of anything but grass and wind and the promise of grass and wind. They had built the house with their own hands, 2 rooms first, then more, as the good years let them. The porch step out front had been worn down over those decades, until the center of it dished like a shallow bowl, hollowed by 10,000 crossings. Walter's boots, her own, and for 22 years, the smaller, quicker feet of their son. Samuel was under one of those 2 markers now. He had been gone 6 winters, a fever that came fast in the night, and the doctor, 40 miles off through drifts no horse could break, and Walter riding out into the dark anyway, and coming back the next afternoon with his hands frozen to the reins, and no doctor behind him, because there had been no getting through. Walter had never once said aloud that he blamed himself. He didn't have to. Edna heard it in the way he stopped speaking of the boy at all, the way a man goes quiet around a wound, so he won't press it by accident. They were 70 now, near enough. The herd was down to 19 head from 140 in the fat years. The far fences sagged. The winter coming was the kind old-timers spoke of in low voices. A hard sky, an early freeze, cattle already growing their coats too heavy too soon, as if the animals knew something the almanac didn't, and 2 old people could not work a ranch through a Montana winter alone. That was the truth Walter would not write in the ledger, though every figure in it pointed at nothing else. The knock, when it came, was soft. 2 raps and then a wait, as though the man on the porch knew that a hard knock at a stranger's door in a storm asks too much of the people inside. Walter got there before she could. He filled the doorway the way he filled most doorframes, big and gone heavy through the shoulders, and he looked out at what the storm had brought them, with a face that gave away nothing. The stranger was young, younger than his walk had promised, 20, maybe, with a boy's jaw not yet grown into a man's, and eyes that were older than the rest of him by a long stretch. Snow melted in the creases of a coat that had been decent once. He took off his hat and held it against his chest with both hands, and the wind tried to take it from him. "Sir, I'm sorry to trouble you." His voice was low and even. "I've been walking since the crossroads. I saw your smoke." He glanced past Walter, once. Not the darting look of a man pricing what he could carry off, but a slow, reading look, the way a horseman reads a horse. "Your woodpile's low for the weather that's coming. Your barn's got a north wind getting in, where the boards have pulled. I know cattle, and I know a ranch, and I can swing an axe. If you'll let me sleep in your barn, I'll cut wood and mend what wants mending, for a roof and a meal. That's all I'm asking." Walter looked him over the way he looked at everything, slowly. "Where you from?" "Nowhere, mostly. Orphan train put me off in Billings when I was 9. I've been working other men's places ever since." He said it plainly, the way you'd give a brand or a birth date. No pity in it, and none wanted. "What's your name?" "Callum, sir. Callum Reese." Edna watched the refusal gather in her husband's shoulders. She knew the shape of it. They'd been burned before. A man 2 years back who'd stayed a fortnight, eaten their stores, and gone off in the night with a bridle and their good hatchet. Out here, kindness had a way of costing more than it saved, and Walter had a long memory for costs. "We can't pay wages," Walter said. It was the beginning of no. "I didn't ask for wages. And I can't feed a man all winter on 19 head and a prayer." The boy nodded, as if that were only fair. He put his hat back on. "Then I thank you for the door opening," he said, "and I'll not keep the warm in." He turned to go, back into the storm, and there was no complaint in the turning, no lingering to be begged to stay. That, more than anything, was what stopped Edna's breath, that a boy with nowhere to go could accept nowhere so gracefully. "Wait," she heard herself say. Walter's head came round. She met his eyes and held them, the way you hold a rope you don't intend to let slip. "There's stew," Edna said. "It's already made. A body doesn't turn a soul back into that on an empty stomach, Walter Hale. Not in this house." For a moment, the wind was the only thing speaking. Then Walter stepped back from the door, which was as much of a yes as the man had in him, and Callum Reese came in, out of the first winter snow, and stood dripping on the floor of a house that had forgotten what a young man's boots sounded like on its boards. He ate slowly. She noticed that. A hungry man who has known real hunger doesn't gulp. He makes it last, out of a respect for food that only the starved ever truly learn. He thanked her twice, and Walter once. He asked no questions. And when the meal was done, he rose, carried his own bowl to the basin, and said he'd take the barn now and be no more trouble. "You'll freeze in that barn," Walter said, not warmly, just as a fact. "I've been colder." He went out. Through the frost that was already feathering white across the inside of the window pane, for it was falling toward 40 below, and the glass wore its ferns of ice like something alive, Edna watched the lantern move across the yard to the barn and go still. And she stood there a long while after Walter had gone to bed, looking at the dark shape of the place where the boy now slept, and at the 2 markers on the rise beyond, and she did not know which of the 3 she was watching over. In the morning, the woodpile had grown. Not by a little, by a wall. Callum had been up since before light, and there was split wood stacked chest-high along the whole south side of the house where the sun would find it, cut and stacked and squared off true. His hands were raw. He said nothing about it. He came in when Edna called him, ate what she set down, and went back out to the barn to start on the boards where the north wind got in. That was how it began, and how it went on. He did not ask what needed doing. He looked, and he saw, and he did it. The dragging gate that had complained for 2 years went quiet. The far trough that had cracked and leaked got patched with a plug of his own whittling. He moved among the 19 heads slow and easy, and the half-wild brindle cow that would let no man near her let Callum thumb the ice from her lashes on the 3rd day, and stood for it. Walter watched all this with his arms folded and his jaw set, waiting. Edna knew what he was waiting for. He was waiting for the boy to want something, for the ask that always came, the true reason underneath the helpfulness. It didn't come. A week went by, and then another, and the only thing Callum Reese ever seemed to want was more work to do before the dark closed in. "He's after the ranch," Walter said one night, low, so it wouldn't carry to the barn. "Old people, no air. He's playing a long hand." "He's a boy who's never once had a place to stop," Edna answered. "That's all he's after. Somewhere to stop." But she said it quietly, because she wasn't sure yet either. And in that country, being sure of a stranger was how you got hurt. The cold deepened. On the worst nights, it dropped past 46 below, and the trees out along the creek cracked like rifle shots as the sap froze in them. It was on one of those nights that Edna woke to the cattle bawling, all 19 of them at once, a sound that yanked her upright in the dark. She shook Walter awake, and they went to the window and saw the far corner of the barn roof gone black and open to the sky. A beam given way under the weight of snow no one had knocked down in time, and the animals below it milling in terror in the killing cold. And out in it, already, a lantern moving. Callum, coat half on, driving the cattle out of the collapsed end and into the sound corner, one at a time, his shoulder to their flanks, his voice steady in the roar of the wind. He worked for 3 hours in cold that could take a man's fingers in 20 minutes. He got every head out. He propped the sagging roof with a pole and a prayer, and lashed a tarp over the gap with fingers he could no longer feel. And when it was done, and the animals were safe and steaming in the good corner, he came as far as the porch step, that step worn to a bowl, and he sat down in it, and he could not get up. They carried him in between them, the two old people, and he was burning. The cold had gotten into the wet of his sweat and turned on him, the way it does, and by dawn the fever had him raving. Edna sat by the fire and did the only thing her mother had taught her, flannel soaked in camphor and goose grease, laid hot across his chest, changed and changed again through the long day. And in the fever, Callum talked. He talked to people who weren't there. He talked to a matron on a train and begged her not to put him off. He talked to men whose names Edna didn't know, foremen and bosses, and to each of them he said the same thing, over and over, until she understood it was the one sentence his whole life had worn a groove around. I'll work harder than any two men. Just don't send me on. Please don't send me on. I don't need the wages. I don't need anything. Just let me stay. And then, quieter, the thing underneath the thing. Wanting a place is a weakness. I know it. I know it's a weakness. I won't want it. I promise I won't want it. Just let me stop. Edna held his burning hand and wept without a sound, because she knew now what she was looking at. Not a schemer. A boy who had been sent on so many times he had decided that needing a home was a flaw in himself, a thing to be ashamed of and stamped down, so that no one could ever again wound him by taking a home away. He had made himself want nothing, so that nothing could be lost. And Walter stood in the doorway of that room and listened, and something in the old man's face broke very quietly and did not put itself back the same way. The fever turned on the third night. By the end of the week, Callum was up, wan and unsteady and mortified to have been so much trouble, trying to get out to the barn before he could stand straight. Walter met him at the door and put one big hand flat on his chest and pushed him, gently, back toward the fire. "You'll sit," Walter said, and after a moment, in a voice Edna hadn't heard from him in 6 years, "You did a thing for us out there, a hard thing. We don't forget it." The snow let off 3 days later, and the sky went that hard, high blue that a hard country wears after a storm. The peace of it did not last past noon. A man named Odell rode up out of the glare with the sun at his back, and he brought the next winter with him, though the sky was clear. He came on a good horse with a heavy coat and a leather case, and he had the smile of a man who has already counted your cattle from the ridge before he tips his hat to you. Silas Odell owned the big spread to the south and half the paper in the valley besides, and he had wanted the Hale water for a decade. He sat his horse in the yard and did not get down. "Walter, Edna," the smile. "Rough winter for two folks getting on. I heard you lost your barn roof." He let that sit. "I'll be plain, as neighbors ought. I'll take the place off your hands, stock and land and all, for what's fair, given the state of it. You'd not have to face another winter like this one. You could go to your daughter in Bozeman and rest." He nodded, pleased with his own kindness. "The stock alone, in this condition, I'd say 12 head, sound. The rest won't see March." Edna felt the floor of her stomach drop. 12 head. He was writing off 7 of their cattle to nothing, pricing their whole life at the bottom of a bad year, and doing it with a smile. Walter stood on the hollowed step and said nothing, and Edna saw in his face that he was tired enough, and beaten enough, and guilty enough over all of it, to say yes. 19 head, said a voice from the barn. Callum came across the yard, still pale from the fever, walking careful. He stopped beside Walter, not in front of him, beside him, and looked up at the man on the horse. 19 heads sound, Callum said, not 12. I've had my hands on every one of them through the worst of the cold, and I tallied them by their coats and their feet not 3 days back. You've got 15 carrying calves come spring, near as I can read them. That's not a herd that won't see March, Mr. Odell. That's a herd doubling by June. He said it flat, without heat, the way you'd read a figure off a page. A man offering a fair price would know the count before he named it. So either you counted wrong from the ridge, or you counted fine, and hoped these folks were too worn down to argue it. Which was it? The yard went very still. Odell's smile stayed where it was, but stopped meaning anything. "And who," he said, "are you?" "Nobody, hired man." Callum held his eyes. "But I can write a tally, and I can sign my name to it, and the brand inspector in Hamilton can ride out and count them same as I did. You want to make Walter Hale an offer. You make it on 19 head and 15 calves. Anything under that, and I'd say you'd best ride on before the light goes." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Odell gathered his reins, and the false warmth came off his face like a coat, and what was under it was only cold. "Sentiment," he said, "is a poor way to run a ranch. You'll both be gone in a year regardless." He turned the good horse and rode it back down the valley, and he did not tip his hat going. Walter looked at the boy beside him for a long time. Then he sat down, heavily, on the step worn into a bowl by 3 lifetimes of feet, and he put his face in his big ruined hands, and his shoulders shook once. Callum stood by him and did not speak, because he was a boy who had learned that some things a man needs to do without being watched over, and so he looked away, out at the 2 markers on the rise, and gave the old man the only privacy the open yard allowed. That night, at supper, Walter set down his fork and cleared his throat in the way he did before the few words he ever spent. "Edna and I have been talking." He didn't look up from his plate. "This place needs a young back, and we've got no heir to give it to. You've got a back, and away with stock, and no place to put either." He turned the ledger around on the table so it faced Callum, though there was nothing written on the open page. "We're offering you a third of the herd, a third of what the land makes, and a name on the paper that says so, filed proper in Hamilton come spring. Not hired man, partner. You'd stay because it's yours to stay in. Not on our leave, on your own right." Callum went very still, and this was the moment Edna had been half dreading, because she understood him now. She watched his hand, where it rested on the table, curl slowly closed. She watched him lean back, the smallest fraction, away from the ledger, the flinch of a boy who has learned that anything offered can be snatched away, that to reach for a thing is to give the world the exact place to wound you. He had spent his whole life making himself want nothing, and here was the one thing he had never let himself want, laid open on the table in front of him, and it terrified him more than any blizzard had. "I can't take a third of what I didn't build," he said, low. "I've been here 3 months. That's not right. That's charity, and I don't." "It's not charity," Edna said. She reached across and laid her hand over his closed fist, and she did not let him pull it back. "You went out into 40 below and pulled our whole herd from under a falling roof and near died of it. You stood in that yard and saved us from selling our life for a smiling lie. Charity is what a man gets for nothing, Callum. You've earned every board of this place twice over." Her voice broke and she let it. "And I'll tell you the truth. That boy in the fever needed to hear, and nobody ever said it to him. Wanting a home is not a weakness. It's the strongest and the plainest thing a person can feel. We heard you, out of your head with the fever, begging to stay. Well," she pressed his fist, "you don't have to beg. You don't ever have to beg again. You're being asked." The boy's jaw worked. His eyes went bright, and he looked down hard at the table so they wouldn't spill, and his fist opened slow under Edna's hand until it was just a hand, an open hand resting in hers. "You rode back," Walter said quietly, and it took Edna a moment to understand he wasn't talking to Callum at all. He was looking at the window, at the 2 markers going blue in the dusk. "I couldn't get through for Samuel. I rode out, and the snow beat me, and I came home with nothing, and I've hated myself for it every winter since." He looked at Callum now, and his old eyes were wet and steady. "But you rode back into it. You went out into the thing that took my boy, and you brought every living creature home. Maybe a man doesn't get to fix the winter he lost, but he gets, sometimes, to be there for the next one. He put out his big hand across the table. "Stay, son. Please stay." Callum took the old man's hand. He couldn't speak. He only nodded and nodded again, and that was answer enough for all three of them. Spring came late that year and hard, the way it does after such a winter, and there were 15 calves born to the 19 head, just as the boy had said there would be. And on a warm afternoon in April, Callum took a chisel out to the crossbeam over the barn door, the one he'd propped with a pole on the killing night, and he cut something into the old gray timber where the sun would strike it every morning. Edna went out to see. 3 names, carved plain and deep into the pale wood: Walter, Edna, Callum, and under them, no flourish, just the year. He'd made no announcement of it. He'd simply done it, the way he did everything, and gone back to his work. She stood in the yard a long while, looking at those pale letters cut into the old timber, and at the woodpile that a boy had built chest-high the very first morning, before anyone had promised him a single thing. And she understood at last that a home is never the walls, or the land, or the name on the paper, but only the people who ride back for you into the storm.